Someone in the White House is spreading misinformation about Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. So to recap, Secretary Austin was hospitalized on January 1st for extreme pain a few days after he had an elective procedure, supposedly for prostate cancer. Then the newspapers reported that nobody at the White House knew Secretary Austin's location for several days. Then today, on January 16th, an article came out saying that when Secretary Austin decided to go to the hospital, someone called 911, which is the American Emergency Services number, and they asked the dispatcher not to use the lights and sirens on the ambulance to keep things quiet about Secretary Austin's condition. And then I was like, okay, I don't know what game the White House is playing, but this is misinformation, and the press is buying it. So here's the problem with this story. This harkens back to the last video I did about why the New York Times gets so many things wrong when they write about the military. That video will be available at the end of this one, but in a nutshell, bad actors can easily mislead reporters because so few reporters have served in the military that they don't really have any of that baseline institutional knowledge. Reporters are missing this baseline level of knowledge to know when they're being misled. And they are being misled. Or I don't know, maybe they're complicit or they're too lazy to understand how the NMCC works. So here's the deal. There is a room called the NMCC, or the National Military Command Center, in the Pentagon in Virginia. It is the job of the NMCC, or National Military Command Center, to track the location of every single person in the National Command Authority. Before that volcano back in Iceland, back in 2010, that shut down air traffic, the NMCC just tracked the location of like the major players. We're talking President, Vice President, House Speaker, Senate President Pro Tem, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, and so on. After that Iceland volcano eruption, with so many people traveling and forced to work on the ground where they were, the NMCC started tracking basically all of the important players. All four-star generals are tracked now, as well as every single cabinet member and assistant secretary. Everyone. Now, working in conjunction with the NMCC is a room inside of the White House Situation Room that's in the West Wing of the White House. You might remember that room from this famous picture of President Obama. Now, I'm not going to talk about that room or say the name. If you know, you know. But they mirror exactly what the NMCC is doing in the Pentagon. So I'm just going to talk about the NMCC. When there is a turnover at the NMCC, which happens a certain number of times a day, I'm not going to talk about that, during the handoff meeting, they go over every single person in the National Command Authority, where they were last, where they are now, where they're going next, and where they're going to be after that. The handoff takes about a half hour to do on a good day. I guarantee you that during the handover, if someone didn't know where the Secretary of Defense was, there would have been some general throwing coffee cups. The Secretary of Defense has people around him at all times. Someone would have notified the NMCC. Someone at the NMCC would have reached out to one of the handlers of the Secretary of Defense or one of his bodyguards. So the idea that nobody knew where the Secretary of Defense was for several days, several shift changes in the NMCC is ludicrous. Now, let's talk about the hospital. The Secretary of Defense was taken to Walter Reed National Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland. That's about 6 miles away from me that way. The director of Walter Reed is actually a Navy captain. This is Captain Melissa C. Austin, who is a board-certified pathologist. I know, they're both named Austin. A little confusing. Do you think that maybe if you're a Navy captain and the Secretary of Defense shows up at your hospital, you might be notified? You might be down in his room with some flowers, like, hey, Secretary, good to see you. Here's my personal business card. Let me know if you need anything. Make sure you get it. So she probably took time out of her day to visit the Secretary. So I'm sure that she knew where the Secretary of Defense was. So let's use ICD-203, the standard for measuring probability in the intelligence community, to estimate the odds of the Secretary of Defense just going missing for several days. So what are the odds that the NMCC and the Pentagon would go through multiple shift changes across several days and not know the location of the Secretary of Defense or try to reach out to the Secretary of Defense's bodyguards? I would call that unlikely. What are the odds that Captain Austin, the director of the Walter Reed National Medical Center, would not know that Secretary Austin was in her facility? I would certainly say that is unlikely. Secretary Austin is a good man. He served 41 years. He retired as a 4-star general. He knows the rules. He's been tracked before. He knows how this works. He would not let himself go unfound for multiple shift changes at the NMCC. Someone at the White House is lying about what happened. I don't know who is lying. I don't know why they're spreading misinformation, unless maybe they're trying to fire this guy and come up with a justification. But the odds of the White House not knowing the location of the Secretary of Defense for multiple shift changes at the NMCC and the mirrored part of the NMCC in the Situation Room is unlikely. Thank you guys for watching.
Oh man, I'm so bored!
Christ on crutches with a permanent profile. That's because you have the wrong toys. You need a Ryan McBeth in action figure from the Knife Hand Company. That's right, Ryan McBeth in action figures go everywhere. Put them on your desk, your Crocs, your keychain. You can even ask Ryan advice.
Ryan, why does Daddy ignore me when I'm over his house for the weekend?
Because your new mommy is way hotter than your old mommy. Trading cards. You get a free trading card in every box. Now that's Ryan-rific. So come on down to the Knife Hand Company and get your in-action figure today. Alcoholism, cigarettes, and non-service connected hearing loss sold separately.